We are here today to hold our second committee meeting related to good cause eviction and the opportunity the city has to opt into the New York State legislation. At the beginning of the process, we made a commitment to hear from a variety of groups that have an interest related to the issue. We have with us today members of the real estate community, and I do have a reminder for everybody. This is the committee meeting. We have an agenda with speakers that we invited and that have committed to speak. It is not a public hearing. Therefore, we will not be calling any additional speakers to the podium beyond our agenda of 4 individuals. Today we have Don Radke from the Greater Syracuse Association of Realtors, Jan Nastry, who is a broker with Nastry Real Estate, Jonathan Geller, who is a landlord and property owner within the city, and Purbeck Anderson, who is an MAI appraiser with Appraisal Research, Inc. What we will do is invite these individuals to step up to the podium and provide a brief statement, and then that will be followed by a short question and answer period with the council. Generally speaking, the statement I would like to be made is, based upon your position and your experience, what insight can you provide on the potential impact of good cause eviction in the city of Syracuse? Data and numbers are preferred to anecdotes. I will remind people that we typically shoot for approximately 1 hour for our committee meetings, and we have 4 individuals who are on the agenda. And so if you can make your opening remarks concise but brief, it would be appreciated. Councilor? Do you have? No? Oh, pardon me. I forgot to do my introductions. Chairing the committee meeting today is myself, Councilor Williams, joined by Councilor Hogan, Councilor Gathers, Councilor Majoke, Councilor Nave, Councilor Paniagua, and Councilor Monto. And with that, I would invite Don Radke to the podium. Sir.
Yeah, he's with me.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having us. I want to apologize. Our president of the Association of Realtors and our CEO are in Boston on a business convention, so they're not able to attend. As realtors, we believe that our goal is the same as yours. Clean, livable housing that is affordable and that strengthen our neighborhood, and to create financial incentives to do this. Good cause eviction legislation does not do this. New York State already has some of the strongest tenant protection laws in the country. At a time when the city of Syracuse is embarking on a major housing initiative, to go and introduce a legislation at this point like this, we do not believe will help. It could disincentivize development. If, in fact, a developer is looking to build apartments in our region and the city of Syracuse has laws in place that cap rent increases as well as create a potential perennial lease, they're going to go to the suburbs sometimes, at least. Rental caps can create a cost increase for everybody, all tenants. If I'm a landlord and I have a maximum cap on my rent and I'm looking to have larger capital needs at some point in the future that may not be covered, or I may not be able to go through the time frame of the process it takes to appeal that, I'm going to raise my rents every year to the max. That's everybody. That's just not people who are in lease renewal situations. This creating a perpetual lease is going to be a disqualifying factor for renovation and improvement of properties, in our opinion, in many instances. If you have tenants that are long-term tenants, year after year after year after year, the ability for the landlord to go in and have an impact on that property, renovate it, fix it up, is going to be diminished. How can you do major capital improvements when people are living there? So I think that needs to be considered. I think we also need to know the number of tenants that currently in the city of Syracuse are evicted solely because of end of term of lease. Not for other reasons, solely because of the end of term of lease. And to go and to have a potential impact on our housing strategy in the city, as well as the other impacts that I'm mentioning, for a number that we don't know, I think is something that we should look into a lot more than we have to date. We're already having problems selling properties in the city, selling multifamily properties in the city because of the ability or inability to get tenants out or to keep tenants. You go to sell a piece of property, an investor comes in, wants to do their own program, have their own tenants, and there's already tenants in there that, may fall under some of the 8 categories in good cause eviction, may not. They're not going to be able to start their investment on the same path that they would choose. I think a part of the bottom line is that this is really a bridge too far. We're a country that has enshrined private property rights. Do we really want to have a situation where a tenant can stay in a property as long as they want, as long as they don't fit the 8 categories, on a property they don't own? So it's our position that we hope this legislation does not get passed. If, in fact, the sentiment is to consider it, I would strongly suggest that we wait a year or two, especially with the housing strategy program that the city of Syracuse is embarking on, and see how this really does affect us. And thirdly, if it does pass, we strongly say, don't pass 1 unit. Don't pass 1 unit. Pass 10. Don't punish that small landlord, which is the majority of our non-owner occupant smaller property owners. Joe?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. A couple of points that I'd just like to point out. First of all, as Don said, our goal as realtors is to provide economic quality housing. And we know that there's a problem, but we don't feel that good cause will help this problem. We think it will make it worse. First of all, let's talk about capping rents. In my business as a realtor, I hear every day from landlords that are getting out of the business, one, because the city's just too difficult, is what they tell me. And I've got stories that I won't labor you with now. And secondly, I hear every day from people that say to me, I know my rents are low, but she's been a great tenant and she's lived there for years and I don't want to rock the boat. She takes care of the house. That's all good landlords want. Pay the rent on time and take care of the property and they'll be left alone, Now, there are people that do not want to invest in the city because it's too difficult. About 4 or 5 years ago, I bought a 3-family house that was a wreck. They paid the rent. They were dogs and smoke. But the walls were yellow. It was terrible. I asked everybody to move. When I was done, I threw out all the appliances because they weren't salvageable. I remodeled the apartment. The neighbors in the neighborhood have thanked me for improving that area. And that's the kind of investment we want in the city. Good cause would have made that impossible because they paid their rent. They were slovenly people. They did the best they could, So capping rents. One, as landlords, I hear it all the time. Fine, I'll raise my rent every single year. I know people that are well below market rent. That's more the norm than the people that are gouging their tenants, okay? It disincentivizes property owners from updating, as Don said. It discourages property investment, as Don and I are both saying. I think if tenants are perpetually in a house, it's going to make less inventory, not more. If people aren't moving, it's going to be harder to find an apartment. Eviction right now is ridiculous. I just had an eviction about 6 months ago. I lost $10,000. I lost months of rent because as soon as I gave him his notice, I went through the whole process, and it cost me $3,000 to evict him. But I lost almost 6 months of rent. Let's see. It will drive out the smaller, middle-income landlords, the local landlords. And what you'll have left is downstate landlords buying up the property because they have the wherewithal to deal with all the stuff. Now, in our estimation, we've talked about this at the board, some of the solutions to the problem would be considering how to incentivize people to go into some of our near neighborhoods and fix up some of the properties. We're all, bring them back on the dole so that people can rent those. More apartments means lower rents, supply and demand. Right now, I just had a situation for a guy, he wanted $1,200 for a beautiful one-bedroom apartment. Took him 3 months, he ended up renting it for $1,000. He had to lower the price. The market is softening, and it ebbs and flows. So consider how to incentivize building, renovating, and cleaning up some of the downtrodden properties. And we're all for you guys going after the bad landlords. I think, and Don thinks, and I think a lot of people here, increase code enforcement, put more guys on the payroll, and go get them. But don't punish the good landlords. That's our feeling. Thank you.
All right. So does anyone on the council have questions for the realtors?
I have a question. Joe, we discussed about when there's like 3-4 months left in the lease. And do you encourage if they want to stay, or do they tell you, we are leaving because we can get something less, or any reason where sometimes you're part of the realtors where you're holding?
I just had a woman give me her notice. People give you notice for various reasons, and you take care of them. I just had a woman give me notice because the guy upstairs was walking too loud, and she was an elderly woman and couldn't take it. She ended up taking an apartment from him, which is fine, but people give you notice for different reasons. With good cause, the tenant will be able to terminate the lease, but the landlord won't. The property owner won't be able to terminate a lease.
So you could be left short within 30 days, they just walk out?
Oh, yeah, they have to give you 30-day notice. I have to give 30, 60, or actually 60 or 90-day notice. So,
all right.
So
tenant protections made it tough enough.
From the perspective of a realtor, and you're helping connect individuals looking for property with available property on the market. When you're having conversations with an individual, hoping to buy a rental or income property, what is the typical assumption for rent increases as you look at a property?
Well, I'll tell you what. If I'm showing a guy an apartment and he looks at it, he may see that it's the rents are well below market rent. That's often the case because the existing landlord leaves their tenants alone. The new landlord is going to probably try to bring it up to market rate, but there's two ways to look at it. That tenant has had the benefit of below market rate for a number of years, So
I think part of the answer is if I'm showing a client, an investment client wanting to buy a two-family house, for instance,
Correct.
The first questions that they're really going to look at is this going to make money? Is this a money-making proposition? Can I make a profit on this investment? Different investors want different levels of profit. But that's question number one. What are the costs? What are the expenses? And as part of that, what am I going to have to do to that property? What's that client going to have to do to that property in terms of capital expenditures or repairs or improvements? And they add the whole thing together, and you look to see if there's a return on your investment, just like any other business.
Mr. Nastri, what's the average as far as when you have to go through eviction? First of all, how many people, like in the last couple of years, have you had to evict?
I've had very good luck because I have very good tenants. I've had one fellow he was a nice man and he was a vet, and it was partially my fault because I let him go 2-3 months, and then I set him the 14-day notice, and then I put him on court. Court was 3 or 4 weeks before I could get him in. That was the gentleman that ended up owing me over $10,000. Plus I paid $3,000 to a lawyer. That's the first time it's happened to me. This guy's probably had a lot more experience. I don't have as many apartments. So I've got 12 or 13 units. But you want to answer that?
Wait,
Ma'am,
hold on.
ma'am.
Yes.
Wait a minute, we're not, what we're going to do is we're going to talk to our people. We already invite, we had a chance last meeting
Should I
for
answer
everybody
that?
else. Yeah, sure. No. Well, go
Don't
on.
answer it? No. I'll answer it later.
Well,
I got a judgment, but it's uncollectible.
Go on.
what Joe is referring to, and I want to make some of us all aware, is that part of what the public doesn't see is the process that a landlord does go through to evict a tenant for various reasons is unbelievable. Someone who lives there now more than 30 days has to get at least a 2-month notice. If it's more than 60 days, I think it's a 3-month notice. And there's not hard facts. I talked to my eviction attorney, and I asked him, I said, what do you think the percentage of people who stop paying rent once they've been noticed to vacate? He said, I think it averages about 50%. I Googled it, and it came up about 50%. So if someone's getting a 90-day notice to vacate at $1,000 a month, roughly, and they get a 90-day notice, they stop paying rent, that's $3,000. But through the process of the court, goes way beyond that 3 months. It sometimes takes 6 or 7 months, as Joe alluded to. So you're out $6,000 or $7,000. You're going to pay $2,000 to $3,000 for the process of eviction. So what the public doesn't see is a landlord adds about $10,000 just to reclaim his property. 5 to 10. 10 is on the high side, but 5 is on, right in that range. Now, from there, he's got to go in and usually redo the apartment. You don't just move one person in and one person out, okay? There's a process there that's very costly. So I just want that to be noted. By the way, my name is Jan. I'm Joe's brother, Jan Nastry. I'm a broker for 45 years in Syracuse. Love our city. And I believe we're all on the same side of this argument, or discussion, I should say. But I think we maybe come at it a little differently. I'm a market approach fella. I think we talk about it. If I go to Danny Wegman's store and he's got a can of soup and it's $1.59, I'm saying maybe I should go to Aldi's or BJ's or somewhere else. Right now, I can tell you, well, let me go back about 90 days. We had a waiting list of people that wanted good product. Good product defined as an apartment or a house to rent, okay? Waiting list. Fast forward to today, all of a sudden I talk to the girls in the office and they say, we're not renting these apartments. Maybe we should have some discussion about lowering these rents. We decided to lower the rents. Market conditions are such that we don't have the demand that we had 90 to 120 days ago. The market works. I want to, as a resident, as a broker, as an investor, all those hats that I have, I want to encourage good people to come to our community to invest, okay? And many, as Joe mentioned earlier, I sold a place yesterday, an apartment house, and the rents were very low. And I said to the owner, I said, you know, your rents are below market. He said, it's my management style. That's my business model. I don't worry about getting top rent. Now, the guy buying it was a younger guy. He saw opportunity there. He saw that he could raise the rents a little bit, buy a good product, invest in our community, and he's a young guy. We want young people investing. Too many of the people in our community look like me. You know what I mean? We want younger people to invest in our community. So,
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
You were talking about the eviction process, how long the process is.
Yes.
So is that different? I'm not a landlord, so I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is that different today from years back, or I mean, how is it different? Because right now, good cause eviction is not going to impact the process of eviction. We don't manage that.
Correct.
So I'm just trying to figure out.
The laws that have been put in place have been such that they give the tenants Let's just give you an example. If a tenant were served with an order and warrant from a judge, the judge in previous day would you say you have 48 hours to get out. That's very difficult for a young family to get out, or anyone, in 48 hours. Now it's 14 days from that order and warrant. Then, from the 14 days, you go to the marshal, get the order, get it served, they get another 14 days. Now remember, the only person paying for this is not the tenant, it's the landlord.
I believe the tenant has paid for that and the rent that they've been. I believe the tenant has paid for that and the rent that they've been paying.
No, they
up
stopped
until
paying
that
the
point.
rent.
Correct, but there's a profit built in.
No.
There's risk in enterprise.
Not-
25%
the part of the
of
risk-
businesses
the
fail after
landlord
1
doesn't-
year.
the land-
50% fail after 5. There is risk when you try to make a profit. And so when you don't receive rent for a month, you have built those risks into the rent that you have been charging the tenant up until that point.
I beg to differ with you, because when that tenant leaves and you've just spent $5,000 to $10,000 just on the eviction process, then you have to redo the apartment for another $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. The next tenant coming along, you can't say, well, now I've got to recapture what I just outlaid, and I'm going to charge. The market will dictate what you get. It's not just an arbitrary fee that you set to try to recoup your loss. It's just not that black and white,
And
respectfully.
with the price of houses today, the margins are a lot thinner.
Right. How long, on average, how long have you owned your property for?
Me?
Yeah, sure. Anyone.
45 years?
45 years. And so I'm assuming that there's been appreciation over that period of time. And so you've been making profit on the appreciation alone.
So that being said, I, as a landlord, should subsidize someone to live there for 90 days to 180 days rent-free because I've had the luxury of appreciation.
So when Best Buy buys a bunch of TVs, some sell it retail, others go on clearance. And it's the whole picture, of your portfolio, of your industry. There is risk. You may month to month lose a little bit of money, but I'm guessing that if you're still in the game, in the industry, you've made a profit.
But that's why we're here. I'm hearing every day from people who are saying, I've got a gentleman, I asked him to write up his story. 2 years it took him to get rid of the tenant because just before the eviction, she'd pay the rent, and you got to take the rent, and then she'd get behind again. She destroyed the place. He says, I want out of the city. It's too difficult to do this in the city. He's keeping his suburban property, but he wants no more, Stacy Ryan, he wants no more to deal with the city because it's too difficult. 2 years and thousands of dollars. Now he's putting in a new kitchen. He had all the hardwood floors done. She destroyed the apartment. So what you're saying is, well, that's the cost of doing business, destroying their house. It's just not right.
I will also offer you the Best Buy example. In this case, I don't have my property. The tenant possesses it for 6 months or so. He has my property. He has my money. Best Buy has their inventory and decide, I'm going to lower the price or I'm going to wholesale the lot. He has choices. I have no choice other than to go through the process, through the courts, and let someone else decide when or if I'll get my property back and the condition that's going to be returned to me.
But the real issue here is, in our opinion, this is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to hamper landlords, and it's not going to create more housing. The goal, I think the goal is to create more housing in a more affordable price. Again, codes, incentivize investment in the city. That's what we are here to do, I think. Get people that want to buy some of these two families. I have the rental registry. They come in and they said to me, they said, we don't have to worry about you Nastries. Your apartments are nice, I took that as a compliment. Every landlord should be like that. We agree with that. But if you want to create more housing, the way to do it is to incentivize investment, the right kind of investment, and then let codes make sure they're kept up. That will create more housing, and it will lower prices of rent.
Have we ever given you, we've given you guys, every time when somebody walks out without paying you, the city has given you a break on your taxes, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I mean, you guys write it off. During the COVID moratorium, I mean, Don, I mean, you probably know.
What was the slogan during COVID? You don't have to pay your rent.
Now, that happened to you, of course, right?
Yeah, of course. You don't have to pay your rent. That's what the message was.
So what would you say, ballpark, Don, what would you say was the lost revenue to other realtors in this town during the COVID moratorium?
During COVID,
Yeah,
75, 80%.
okay, so.
But good cause
But
eviction.
that's a risk. I guess we
Oh, sure.
thought, a 1,000-year pandemic, that was a risk, right?
No one's here crying about business risk. We're not crying about business risk at all. We understand that. Good cause eviction, the purpose of good cause eviction is there are people who do not have places to live. What is good cause eviction going to do to increase the number of households that we need in this community? I mean, I happen to sit with Councilor Hogan on the Housing Strategy Committee. We need 17, 20, 23,000 units in the next few years. Good cause eviction is not going to create one. And it may and will, in my opinion, disincentivize some developers from coming into the city and adding to our inventory. And we just can't risk that.
And to Don's point, in that Housing Strategies Corporation, right now, we have $7.5 million. That is not going to build that many units. What we're going to have to depend on is private investment in this community.
Absolutely.
To build those units.
When the consultant company did their housing strategy that we all sat on for 6 months, the estimated dollar that we need in this community to bring everything up to code and build the necessary housing is over $2 billion. That is never coming from the public sector, ever. That $2 billion does not exist from taxpayer dollars. We need private incentivization. We need individuals to come into our neighborhoods, our good neighborhoods, our bad neighborhoods. We need people to come into all of our neighborhoods and fix them up and live there and become productive citizens. That's what we need. And
Don,
we need to figure out a way to do it.
We don't have bad neighborhoods. Let's back off that rhetoric.
No,
Every
by
neighborhood
bad-
is a good
thank you,
neighborhood.
Tommy. By a bad neighborhood, I mean a neighborhood where the value of the property is
you for qualifying
deteriorating.
that.
Thank you for bringing that up.
All right, gentlemen.
And I just one last thing. I
We'll
want you
leave
to
it with
know
this.
that I
We
hear
have two other
every
speakers.
single, well, probably 3 or 4 times a week, I don't want to buy in the city, and because of all the restrictions. That's what we're hearing as realtors.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Jonathan Geller. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Geller, and I'm a local landlord. I live here in Liverpool, New York. First, let me start off by thanking the Common Council for allowing me to come speak. Special thanks to Corey Williams and Norman Ross, and the public who took time out of their day to come here and listen to this issue. I'm lucky because I am successful in this business. I've been raised in this business, worked in apartment properties all my life, from the summers after school, and up until the point now where I'm 52 years of age. And the Common Council, you have a difficult decision to make. And I'd like to try to offer my opinion and understanding of how changes in legislation change the way properties are managed. I've learned, and based upon my experience over the years, that when changes in legislation take place in this industry, it's a little bit like a chess match, okay? Legislation is introduced, and now landlords and property managers have to try to determine how we're going to operate with this new legislation, and are there things that we can do to try to make it easier to manage or more beneficial for us and more beneficial for the residents. Currently, I own about 200 apartments. I own 81 apartments here on Polk Street that I bought from Dolph Shays in 2015. I think from a landlord standpoint, and it's important for me for us to understand what apartments we're talking about here. I don't think we have people who are living in apartments in Armory Square or Franklin Square, that's in Syracuse, that are here pounding the table for good cause eviction. That doesn't happen. Primarily, we're talking about properties, multifamily properties, that have been built in the 50s and 60s, which house working class families, and these properties generally, based upon their age, are always in the need of improvements. Okay, so these are the apartments that we're talking about. For me as a landlord, okay, and I wanted to be as prepared as possible to come here and speak to the Common Council, the biggest thing for me is the non-renewal of lease issue or the end of term lease. And I'm going to explain to you why. And I crunched some data because I wanted to be prepared. With my 81 apartments on Polk Street, over the last 12 months, I have rented 41 apartments, okay? That's half of my property in 12 months. During the same time, I went in and looked and reviewed my record. I had returned 3 security deposits, okay? We have no stability in working class properties. It's very important to understand that when we turn apartments, okay, and we're talking about somebody vacates an apartment and we're getting it ready for the next family to move in, there are expenses associated with that. The greater the number of the turns, the more the expenses accumulate, okay? When that happens, we have to try to find a way to keep our profits coming in so that we can afford to sustain and run the properties appropriately. On my working class apartments, I generally spend around $450 annually per apartment on capital improvements to make sure my properties are efficient
I apologize.
and working
I'm
properly.
trading note back and forth. Could you repeat that number of the investment
so
you made?
approximately about $450 a month, or not a month, per apartment annually is spent in capital improvements on my properties. This ensures that my properties are in working condition and functioning properly. Now again, when we're talking about apartments that were built in the 60s, there's always something to fix, okay? They're never going to be perfect, whether it's parking lots or hot water tanks. And I had a boiler go this week that I had to replace that was $10,000 in a 6-unit building. You've got to put the money in to these properties. And I think when you're considering this legislation, you have to understand that you are casting a very wide net over different landlords and different types of apartments, okay? The problem is, if we cap the income, which wouldn't be such a big deal, we do not have the ability to cap our expenses. And for instance, and what I have noticed, okay, and every day, my workday starts out with buying supplies for the properties at either Home Depot or Lowe's. What I have noticed over the last couple of years since COVID is obviously the inflation in the supplies, which is drastic. Okay, we used to be able to buy paint for $10 to $12 a gallon. Now it's $25. Okay, I'm sure there are other landlords here that own working class apartments. Okay, a lot of time when tenants move out, we have to replace interior doors. They're punched, they get punch holes and kicked. Prices of doors used to be $34, $35 for a hollow core door. Now they're $69, okay? And those are just a few expenses that come up. So if we cap income and we don't have the ability to cap expenses and we shrink our profit margins, we're lowering our net operating incomes. Hence, we're devaluing our properties.
So can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So when you talk about capping income, so that's how much would you raise regularly?
Well, it really
your rent
depends.
in a
I
year?
think from a successful landlord standpoint, we have to get what the market will bear. Now, what are we seeing nowadays?
So what is that?
So it depends. You have to look at what other comparable properties in your marketplace are charging for those units. If I price something too high, okay, then I'm going to lose an educated, good prospect who's touring the market and trying to get the best bang for their buck. Okay, so I can't tell you a percentage or how much it'll be, but as a good landlord, what I can continuously do is follow what other companies are doing management-wise and where they feel their apartments should be priced at.
So you're talking more about depending on where you're situated.
You have to be aware of your competition. Not because they're just competition, but you have to have an understanding of where your apartments should be priced.
So you claimed you have to get what the market will bear.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
The statement you made is that you have to get what the market will bear.
Yes.
I don't know that I agree with that.
Well,
why do you have to be at the upper end of that? Why don't you prioritize stability and quality tenants over profit?
Well, we have an application process, and it's pretty strict. I'm going to give you an example. Somebody moved down here from downstate, a great job at Amazon, solid credit. Move into my 39-unit building on Polk Street. 3 weeks go by, no problems. Another 3 weeks go by, he has a dog. Okay, you have a dog. Let's get the appropriate paperwork that says he's an emotional support animal or whatever it may be. Doesn't produce the paperwork. 3 more weeks go by, now there's 2 dogs, okay? Now we're getting complaints from other people in the building who are stepping in dog feces in the hallway, and this person is not taking care of this dog. We had to get him out of the apartment because the smell from dog feces coming out of his apartment was so disruptive to the other people living on the property. And in addition, and regarding your expenses, okay, insurance companies nowadays who are insuring habitual properties, their numbers are astronomical. You cannot get a policy these days in working class apartments for less than $500 per apartment, which is astronomical compared to what it used to be. There are a lot of expenses that people in different industries may not understand that take place. When I have to turn 40 apartments in 12 months, I have an expense for roll-off dumpsters, okay? When people vacate apartments, they leave garbage and furniture behind. Now, I can't just take this furniture and a lot of this garbage and throw it in our dumpsters. We can't do that. Our trash contractors don't allow us to do that. So what do I have to do? I have to bring in, from a contractor, a construction dumpster, okay? In the last 12 months, I've brought in 10 construction dumpsters to get rid of trash and furniture from tenants who have left. Okay, at $400 a piece, that's $4,000. It adds up. There are a lot of expenses that we deal with that maybe you're not familiar with based upon what it is that you do. Now, I would love to help try to give you guys an all-encompassing understanding of how these things affect us. It has become very, very hard for us to earn a dollar here in Syracuse. And as not only a landlord, but as an active investor who's purchasing more property and looking in marketplaces, I will be very honest with you. When I hear there's a town that has adopted good cause eviction, I take those properties off my list. They're not attractive to me anymore. Simply because if I can't control a business that I've put my money in and that I'm working, why am I doing it? Okay? If good cause eviction is adopted here in Syracuse, I will absolutely put my 81 units on the market. Okay? And here's why. Because I'm successful and I have substantial equity on that property, more than 7 figures, okay? That equity would be better served for me in a different marketplace. Now, that may not mean anything to any of you on the Common Council immediately, but if you think about it, who am I selling my property to? I'm selling it to the highest bidder. Anybody in this room would do the same thing, okay? Now, traditionally, here in Central New York, who are the highest bidders that come in here to buy multifamily properties?
Out of state.
Out of state, that's
LLCs.
correct. And then what happens is we end up with Ballantine Gardens, okay, where you have 138 units now that are offline because a gentleman from Brooklyn bought those properties, overpaid, is having someone manage for them absentee when he lives 5 hours away, okay? He's not somebody who's on his property every day, touching it and feeling it and smelling it and knows his tenants on a first-name basis, okay? They come in here, all they do is look at the numbers and how much rent they're collecting and what their expenses are, and that's their investment. They don't see it any other way. And that's when properties like that go upside down and you have units offline.
How much a profit? At the end of a calendar year, let's take one apartment. How much when you have to expenses, you collect rent, at the end of the year, how much profit do you make on one apartment? Could you say?
That's a difficult question to answer.
Okay.
Okay, that all depends on what broke during the year or how many tenants fulfilled their lease. Okay, everything's relative. We have good years and bad years, just like any other industry. Okay, we have responsibilities to keep our buildings safe for all of the people living there. And if we can't terminate leases, especially on a property where I have no stability to the point where I'm turning over 50% of the property, the last thing that I want to do is not renew somebody's lease. If I decide not to renew somebody's lease, I'm doing it for the benefit of the other people in that building. Okay? We've had many situations where I've lost very stable and good tenants based upon a person occupying an apartment in their building that I could not get out. And you know what? It comes with the territory. I am not pounding the table. I am not going to the poorhouse. Okay? I'm not sitting here and saying, don't do this. But what I want you to do is understand that a lot of times, like I said in the beginning, it's a little bit of collateral damage. If I can't get someone out at the end of the lease, well, you know, this nice woman who's been living in this apartment for 20 years doesn't want to put up with the traffic that's going up and down the hallways for whatever reason. And there's a lot of different reasons when we're talking about working class apartments and who's coming in and out. It's just the way it is. Crime rates tend to increase in more of lower income areas. It's just the way it is. And it's unfortunate. Would I love to change it? Sure, I would. But I'd like to give you guys, the hard facts so that you can do the best job possible in trying to make a decision that's for the greater good of everybody. I understand positions from tenant advocates, and I'd love to work with them to try to make sure that some of these landlords who aren't putting the money back into their properties to make sure that the heat's working, like we had in Rugby Square a couple years ago where people lost their heat for 2 weeks during the holiday season. Well, that's because they had an outdated heating system that was an original heating system. They had 212 units there, and they didn't want to spend the money when there was programs available to them through NYSERDA and National Grid to lower the cost of changing these heating systems. That's right. Not everybody manages or operates their properties the right way. And to cast a wide net is somewhat of a problem. You don't want to lower the net operating incomes on properties because it'll decrease the value. Now, that could be substantial. That could be a substantial difference between a loft luxury apartment there on Walton Street as opposed to a working class apartment that I own, for instance, on Polk Street. I just want to look in my notes and see some other things that I felt were important to point out. I know you guys spoke a little bit briefly about the eviction process. What I've learned is many, many things changed since COVID. The eviction process has slowed down to a turtle's pace. Originally, if we had decided to file an eviction for, say, non-payment proceedings, okay, we turn it over to our attorney, and they file the documents, and we get a court date, okay? Generally, it used to, pre-COVID, take around 6 weeks to get someone from start to finish to the point where a warrant was executed and the marshal came in and performed the eviction. Now it's about 5 months on average, okay? Slowing down the eviction process, what it does is it's like a revolving door. Someone moves out of an apartment, someone moves in. Now, when the eviction process slows down, I've got someone living in an apartment that I can't get out, and I've got somebody who would like to come into this apartment that I can't get in, okay? Now, I don't know whether or not that's fixable, but the eviction process has to speed up a little bit. It's too slow, and it is definitely costing people the ability to get into apartments. You got to remember, nobody likes to get evicted, and it's unfortunate. I don't like to do it. It costs me money in legal fees, and I've been spending a lot more in legal fees the last couple of years, okay? But when we get somebody out, somebody gets to move into a new home.
So I just want to remind everybody again that the good cause eviction does not manage the eviction process.
I understand that, but there are factors involved with the industry in a whole, and then when you combine all these factors and look at them all encompassing, from an investor standpoint, from a landlord standpoint, again, it gets back to, is my equity best served here in the city of Syracuse, or is it best served somewhere else? At the end of the day, I'd like to think you guys want to keep the local landlords here who are successful because we have a track record of being successful, and the properties are important to us. I'm here every day on my properties. I have boots on the ground every day. It's unfortunate that you have people who come in here from out of town and run the properties the way that they do. Maybe there could be some stipulations within good cause eviction if you were to adopt it, that there would be a certain amount of CapEx that each landlord should have to pay or put into the property over a 36-month allocation. And if you put those CapEx dollars into your property, then maybe good cause eviction doesn't necessarily come into play. But if you have someone who sucks every penny out, and the people who are living in the buildings are left to live there with heating systems that don't work and plumbing lines that leak and all sorts of issues, that's a problem.
Have you lost tenants? Like you were saying earlier, somebody had 1 or 2 dogs and all the feces. So the other tenants don't like the smell. So do they say, hey, I have a right to walk out right now because of damn smell? And you're stuck with it?
It's happened. It's a problem. I mean, like I said, stability is my biggest problem on that property. There are many reasons why. And obviously, if you live in Syracuse, you're familiar that there's been a local rash of car thefts and break-ins. I had a great tenant move in to work at an accounting firm from out of town. His car got stolen. His girlfriend did not feel comfortable at our property anymore. They decided to move out. We worked out a buyout agreement with them, which was fine. But it hurts me from a stability standpoint. And, you know, it was unfortunate to me as a landlord when this person's car was stolen directly under a security camera that we never got a call from the police department to look and see our cameras. And that was disappointing. You know, in a way, they're letting us down. I know this isn't an easy topic. I know there are people that don't live in properties with landlords who take care of them. But there are some problems with good cause eviction. And if the goal is to provide better housing, I just don't see it being a feather in the cap for that particular. I don't see it helping in that regard. I just don't. Let's remember that there are a lot more people who are going to be coming into this marketplace with more disposable income based upon what's going on with Micron. And the more people that come into this marketplace with disposable income, the inventory will shrink. Obviously, Jan and his brother Joe talked about supply and demand, and when the inventory shrinks, the rents are going to go up. And I think that's something we need to be prepared for. It's something that I think I struggle with on a daily basis, try to figure out how can I make my property more stable, and at the same time, am I doing a good enough job that the people who are living on my properties are happy?
Are you willing to work with people like those who advocate the good cause eviction and to say, well, if we put this in or we put this in where we could get a compromise, is that a possibility? But have you talked to like tenants unions or, go ahead, sir.
Good cause is a state piece of legislation.
Correct.
Okay.
There's only so many. Correct.
Okay.
Two
That's it.
adjustments. Correct.
You have to speak at the mic. You can't just speak over there.
I think I've said enough. I hope that everyone here is at least maybe I brought something to your attention that maybe you weren't familiar with initially. If there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. I hope that this works out for everybody, but you know, at the end of the day, this is how I provide, put food on the table for my family. I put my boys through college. This is all I know how to do. I'm very happy with my life. It's been very good to me. But again, understand that when changes in legislation take place, it does cause changes within the industry from a management and landlord standpoint. I just would like to be part of the problem, part of the solution to the problem, and not part of the problem.
So you got to work with state representatives on this.
Well, you know, we're busy. You know, every day there's something going on, and you know, unfortunately,
And
when you speak to people from the state, it can be
Jonathan
difficult.
and I met through a connection with Assemblywoman Hunter.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
actually,
here if
so-
it wasn't for Assemblywoman Hunter, and I thank her greatly for allowing me to get this opportunity to speak in front of all of you. I hope that I've helped, and I'm always available for questions from a different perspective, should anyone on the Common Council feel it's necessary. Thank you very much.
All right. So on my agenda, we've got one more speaker, Purbeck Anderson, and then Councilor Jones-Rouser requested one additional speaker. I will let her introduce that individual.
Good afternoon. My point of reference is, my name is Pierre Beck Anderson. I'm a real estate appraiser here in Syracuse. I've been doing that for more than 30 years. And my point of reference is a little bit different than the former speakers in that my involvement is typically with the appraisal process and the financing process. And 90%, probably 95% of the time, when I deal with banks, typically, we will have a applicant who comes in and wants to reposition a property. And when I say reposition, they want to renovate and restructure the rents in some way. And in any appraisal, the income that a property generates it begins with that. Everything falls from that. Following that is going to be what we term a vacancy and collection loss. In the industry, a typical vacancy and collection loss in a stabilized market is 5%. What that relates to is frictional vacancy, people changing jobs, family units breaking up, so on and so forth. I can see that probably now increasing because what people will likely do is they will make the process of qualifying tenants higher. And what that means is that you go have units vacant for a longer period of time, and therefore your vacancy will be higher, and therefore the income which you end up with will be correspondingly lower.
Can I get a point of clarification? And I think I poorly asked it to the individuals early. You mentioned that your starting point is the income that a property will generate.
Correct.
When you're making an appraisal, what rent growth do you build into that assumption? And I would like to provide for context that we read earlier this year in the New York Times that our market saw a greater than 20% rent increase, which was the highest in the nation.
Well, it depends where your base point is. To say that all rents have increased 20% a year, I would be very surprised to see that. There are certain instances that there are typically when we are projecting a stabilized rent, say a landlord is coming in, they want to renovate a property, we will project a rent following those renovations. I know you want to talk figures and cents, but typically from an appraiser you tend to deal with history, right? Because banks are a little bit adverse of accepting projections, because particularly in the current environment that's very difficult to do. The last 5 years has been very humbling for all appraisers and anybody thinking that they know how to predict the market, realtors as well. It has been really very, very difficult. I mean, to give you an idea, in Syracuse, when you're doing an appraisal, there is something called a time adjustment or a market trend adjustment. You know, I laugh at some appraisers because they say, I haven't made one of those in 20 years in Syracuse. And that relates to rents as well, because property value and rents, all of those things are interconnected because it starts with the income. I think probably nowadays people will go, I think they may go to 3 to 5%. Lenders are very adverse to seeing anything that's substantially above inflation, which has been probably 2%. If you remove 2 of the years out of the last 4 that were atypical, it's probably averaged slightly over 2% over the last 20 years.
And so I think that the terms of the legislation that we're considering allows for that. If there's a rent cap between 8 and 10%, the number that you just cited is well below that.
It does. But it depends for instance, and a couple of the former speakers have talked about someone will buy a property. Some landlords' method of management is very different than others. In other words, they may not be leveraged very highly. In other words, they may have owned the property a long time, or they may have been able to buy it at a favorable price. So their debt service on this property is not as high as though you were buying it at quote unquote market. Those individuals are able to keep their rent at a lower rate and keep the property more stable. Some people choose to do that. I mean, it can be a very personal choice. Others and if they have a good tenant, they like to keep them. Jonathan was talking about stable tenancy, durable income. Those are the things that create value. Uncertainty to a landlord is very bad news, because what it immediately affects is the ability to make a return on your investment. Now, I don't need to, I'm not going to run through every expense in an appraisal, but they are quite relevant. I mean, taxes have gone up, insurance has gone up, maintenance obviously is very high now. One number that we've historically always sort of just thrown a nominal figure in there would be for, legal and professional services. Having listened to the former speakers, that number is obviously going to have to be adjusted upward quite considerably. And you have to take all of those expenses out of the income, and that's what drives your value. And honestly, from my standpoint of because we deal with investors all the time, from both local, downstate, and national, and their big thing is stability and what is the upside in rent. If there's no upside in rent, they're not interested. And placing an encumbrance on a property, which this in a sense is, it's not a legal encumbrance, to the property itself, but it does place a limit on the property. And what they'll do is they'll look for alternative investments. They will take the whatever equity they have, and they will seek out markets where they don't have those restrictions. One of the first things to deteriorate when you see the income going down in a property is maintenance. That is the first thing that landlords stop doing, is spending money on upkeep. And that will immediately, means your rental stock will deteriorate. And there are obviously areas in the city where, property quality is not as good as others in terms of maintenance. And that obviously ultimately will have an impact on the tax base because, if a property doesn't have much street appeal, that will again affect your bottom line, as it were. And it's going, it's that ultimate deterioration is what, when a neighborhood or property starts a downward slide, there are only a couple of ways that change that. Gentrification of the neighborhood, which you've seen in some parts in Syracuse, not very much, but is someone coming in, buying a property, and wanting to renovate it and reposition it in the market. And that generally involves, obviously, heavy investment and also a restructuring of the rents. And that can obviously run afoul of this legislation. I would tell you that also I'm licensed with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to do rent studies for renewal of Section 8 contracts, and it is a constant. In Syracuse, it is a very hard place to perform those jobs because you've often had this big variation between what is quote unquote market under HUD's definition versus what the real market is. I mean, most markets are self-adjusting. I mean, as Jan said, if you go into a place and the rent's too high, you're not going to be renting there. But there are a lot of properties that, you may have a 20-unit apartment building and, you may have 4 or 5 people in there who have, what are termed renewal discounts, i.e. good tenants have always paid on the first of the month, and people, the landlord hasn't been in to have to do anything, and in exchange for that, they've kept their rents lower, and that impacts the value of the property. And if an investor now comes along and says, "Well, I'd like to renovate all these units and increase the rent," that will be a major stumbling point because they won't be able to do it. And that is when that investor is going to go outside the city without question. So does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Councilor Jones-Rouser.
Yes. Thank you, Counselor. I would like to call Walter Island, a local minority real estate investor, to speak. Before you do, Walter, I do want to just say something to the 20% increase that you referenced. Because of the, just stating it as it was, is kind of it would be kind of a sticker shock. Out of the possible 30 cities that article referenced, yes, Syracuse was number one at a 20% increase. But if you look at the entire article of the cities that they mentioned, we're number two in the average rents. So we still were at the lowest rents out of all of those cities that they did reference.
Hello, my name is Walter Island. I am a landlord, property owner. I have a property management business that I have been running ever since 2009. I just recently invested and partnered with some out-of-state investors that purchased a building here in the city, a commercial, a mixed-use building, a commercial residential building, and they was looking to do more business. We just recently had to evict someone. We didn't want to, but that person was having medical issues that they couldn't work. In addition, with their family splitting up, for 3 months, they couldn't pay their rent. So we moved forward on getting them out. And forgive me, I want to thank you, gentlemen. I want to thank the Common Council, because I came down here unprepared. I came down here to listen. And immediately, everything that y'all was saying was catching my ear to the point where, how dare I go and get investors to come into this chaotic state that I've been dealing with for over 25 years of owning property, right? And been doing my best, because the property that I own is in neighborhoods that don't get looked at a whole lot as far as investors, right? And for me to increase my rent is almost impossible. The investors in my in the development company, with the person just moved out, they want to go up on their rent, which they should. A 3-bedroom going for $700? No. So they want to take it up to $1,000 for a 3-bedroom. Not only did they want to take it up, they no longer want to do first month and security deposit. They saying, you know what? We want first month, last month, and security deposit, because if it take that long for us to get an attorney to get that person out of here, we're steady losing money all along the way. That's not why they invested.
We can't do last month here.
Huh?
We can't do last month here.
Thank you. I didn't know. But again, where they're from, that's part of their solution, right? I don't know how this whole platform came out, but I'm always curious when you're putting something out there for rules and regulations for people to follow, do you actually get them involved in the beginning stage of creating these documents? This gentleman made a statement. It blows my mind that the Common Council asked him if he would be willing to help in the process if there need to be some additional work that need to be done. Absolutely. They should, you should have landlords at the table anytime. Anytime you're making up a policy, the people that is going to affect, the renters and the landlords, need to be at the table when that's being done. I don't know if that was the case or not, but I have been in those situations where policies are being made that will affect people, and they're not at the table. They're not even being invited to the table. I just happened to have to get off a job to come down here because I received a text message earlier this week, you need to be there. You're a landlord. You need to understand what's going on. I think that you, with everything with the hotels, all of a sudden, now they want to be landlords. They want to turn their hotels into apartments. With the influx of what's going on with 81 and the need for us to be able to find residents for the tenants that's coming out of places that's getting torn down and have to be relocated, you're making it so difficult for landlords, investors to even want to stay in this market. I would hope that even for me, that you would, at this point, right now, reconsider moving forward on this until you have a more informed opportunity to, one, talk to the landlords in a real session, not in the common council, in a real talk-to-talk session where we can speak our mind without necessarily being recorded about what we're speaking, right? And we can have some dialogue that is just that real dialogue. This is formal. At this point, I almost feel like it's a lost cause, right? I shouldn't feel like that. The property that I own, I'm paying taxes on that, and I should be receiving information on a regular basis. This is coming down the pipeline. It doesn't happen. When it comes down to codes, the lead problem, the asbestos problem, the dilapidated homes around here, we have some beautiful structures, but I cannot afford to rip out all the lead, encapsulate all the lead, or remove all the lead in those properties to give my tenants a good, safe place to move. If the city want investors like myself, these gentlemen here, they're involved with major market. You know, the government talks about small business. Small business is a business that has 50 employees or more. I don't even touch small business, right? I'm not even on a map for a small business, but yet I'm investing in places and areas that I can't get no help. I can't get no help. If you're going to come up with a policy and a procedure, you should at least consider how do you help those that want to invest. If you want something like this to really work, give us the tools that we need in order so that we can. I want to be like this. I want to get to the point where I own enough property that I can say, oh, I got a good life.
So Walter,
but right now, go ahead.
One of the points of the legislation is that the if you own 10 units or less, then you're not affected by this. But a lot of the cities that have opted into it have taken theirs to one. So if you own just one unit, if beyond one unit, then you're affected by it. What do you speak to that?
It's unfortunately how, with a turn of a dime, things can change. You can get investors involved, and then you can change, and all of a sudden, it's a whole new rule. For me, to bring it down to 1 year, right now, I'm right below that threshold. With the personal property that I own, I'm under that 10. But with the investment property that I'm involved in and manage, I'm way above that, right? And for those that are above that, I look forward to learning how do you incorporate that amount of money that you say is incorporated in the rent already. How do a person like me incorporate that in a community that I'm serving? Because they can't afford it. I deal with Section 8. I guarantee you, watch the statistics. Landlords that deal and willing to accept Section 8, they're not dealing with that because Section 8 people be moving all over the place, tearing up some things. Not all of them, but most of the time, they don't have the understanding about how to treat property. They understand about apartments and apartment building, but put them in a two-family house and they got to deal with just one neighbor. It's hard. It's difficult, right? So I'm going to end with this, unless someone has a question. I have always, and I will always, offer my services, my time to sit down and have conversation about what will work or get a better understanding for me so that I can be an advocate for the good things that you're trying to do. I understand you're trying to do things that will help the city and things of that nature, but who's lobbying for you? If just the people that really making all the money is the ones that's lobbying for this to be done, what about the ones that's just barely making it and still willing to do something because they know it needs to be done? And that's the only way it's going to get done, because you're out-of-town investor. I remember when the city put the moratorium on out-of-town investors, and you had to either have a maintenance company that is within 1 mile or something of the city, that or 1 hour, that can be a piece of property in 1 hour, or you couldn't do it. That's not happening. We come up with these guidelines and we put these rules, and the ones that it affect the most, the ones that cannot go under the radar, the ones that cannot get the assistance, and the city is telling me, I bought a piece of property off the city.
Mr. Island,
No.
at the end of the day, are you making a profit, put food on your table to pay your bills, or are you just floating?
At the end of the day, I'm making a profit.
Okay.
On the investment property that I just had individuals invest in, not. Okay. And one of the reasons, because they did not realize what the market was doing, and they bought the property when the owner had the rent down so low, and then when you go to raise the rent, you're being told, no, you can't raise it that high, that fast. You can go up $50. You might can go up $75. But anything above that, you might get a phone call.
How is it when you need to take a bank loan out?
Say that again?
When you need to take a bank loan out, is that easy, or
No,
is it hard?
it's not easy. It's very frustrating because, as one of the gentlemen said, they look at how much the property is making. And they look at, they ask you.
I'll speak to that. To take out I live in the same neighborhood, and I'm an investor in the same neighborhood as Walter. And as this young man over here stated, to take out a bank loan, you have to have an appraisal within 6 months of that ask. And for our neighborhood, the prices are already low. So having an appraisal in the last few months, appraisals are a little bit up, but prior to the last year, appraisals, our neighborhood market averaged $30,000, $40,000, possibly $50,000 a home. So that's extremely low. So as far as the rents, I don't know where you figure they fall from there. So to get a loan after appraisal, that may possibly be low as well. You still have to, the rents and the repairs don't really add up. And I'm only talking about our neighborhood.
Right. One piece of property that I have was $47,000. I wanted to go in and gut it because it has the old tube and thing, wiring. Everything is old, and it has the lead on the framing and stuff. I was blessed enough that the city was able to help me get some windows to deal with that situation. But in order for me to go in and and demolish a lot of that and start all over, $84,000. I went to get a loan. I didn't have a problem. I don't have a problem with taking the loan out, but they had a problem with saying, let me check that neighborhood. Oh, well, recently, the property only was selling $80,000 in that neighborhood. But most recently, we get new houses in there, right? Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, 2 years later, the appraisal went from $80,000. Oh, your house is worth $140,000. And I'm saying to myself, okay, well then I can get that 80,000 if they really think that. They're not. They don't believe that. They don't see that. They're not going to give me that money. They did not give me the money for it. It makes it difficult in certain areas. I would like for you to look across the board and not make a blanket assumption that we're going to take care of our landlord issue by doing this. Every landlord is not negative landlord. Every investors are not good investors. We have to do our job in putting in things in place that will get rid of the bad and incentivize the ones that's doing the good things.
I just want to say, it seems like we're talking about profit, loss, all that stuff. Way too much. All I know is these folks over here have invested in our community. They invested a lot more of the money. They invested time away from their families probably, sweat equity and all that. And a lot of times they stabilize neighborhoods. Personally, I live in a neighborhood that was literally saved by a saloon keeper who bought houses around his saloon and turned it from a neighborhood that was on the precipice of falling off the cliff into a nice working class neighborhood now. So I don't think we should ever criticize folks as far as they invest in money in this city. We certainly don't give them a break on their taxes when they invest money in the city. They take a chance with everything. They're the ones putting their lives on the line. And I just want to say that.
So Councilor Williams, if I may.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
Walter.
thank you, Mr. Island. I believe this good cause eviction guide, the guide that we have here that was given to us by our city auditor, I believe. There's a portion here that says, where else does this? So to the gentlemen and to anybody that was a speaker today, it says city across New York have already opted in, including Albany, Nyack, Kingston, Ithaca, New Paltz, Beacon, and Poughkeepsie in 2024. Is there a date when they have adopted this this year? And if so, have any of you spoken to your colleagues in those areas to determine whether or not the market is relatable to Syracuse, New York, versus other places?
Yes, I'm also a member of the New York State Association of Realtors, and we're doing some of that study right now. There are several cities who have adopted good cause eviction. So far, it has not made a dent in the homelessness angle of this legislation. That said, the data is not in yet. I think Albany was the first one to adopt good cause eviction. That was a little over a year ago. So there's just not enough time. And that's why I suggest for the Common Council, if the majority really thinks this is a good idea, I plead with you, wait a year or two. Wait a year or two. Let's see what the data comes in from other cities. Let's see what data comes in from Syracuse.
It also speaks on fair market. It says FMR here, the acronym for that. The FMR relatable from those 5 cities versus Syracuse. Is that close as well?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
It's the fair market rent, the price.
Well, I
for
think
that.
as Councilor Jones-Rouser said, yeah, rents in Syracuse have gone up, no question about it. But we were one of the lowest in the state, if not the lowest in the state, and one of the lowest in the countries. So yes, while our increase has been unprecedented in the 48 years I've been doing this, it still is so far down the totem pole of the rest of the country.
However, incomes have not matched that increase.
I had an individual say to me the other day, who you all know, I'm not going to throw him under the bus. I think, and I tend to agree with him, I think we have less of a housing availability and affordability problem, which we do have, and more of a wage problem.
Right. And when rent increases at 20%, the corresponding income increases, we have a gap that continues to widen and puts a burden
no
on the
question, and
tenants.
I'm not making light of that at all. But I also want to put some things into perspective. When you talk about those kinds of rent increases, that includes all rents. That includes new construction, which was built not in the 1960s, not in the 1920s, but in the year 2010 or 2015. That includes renovation. That includes public housing rents that are also very high. So, just to make a statement, rents have increased 20%. Therefore, and I'm not saying you're making this assumption, but I've heard other people make the assumption, landlords are gouging people. That's not true. It's simple. Is there a landlord that gouges here or there? I'm sure there is. But to paint all landlords with one brush, as this legislation does, is a disservice.
Okay.
This really isn't about me. It's about whether good cause will correct the problem. And I don't believe it will. I don't see how good cause is going to make one more apartment available or get rents down. I'm seeing them come down now naturally, but I don't see how this legislation is going to fix the problem. And as Don said, let's wait and see what Albany has to say. And this is not New York City, you know?
It's certainly not NIAC. I've been to NIAC, too.
Yeah.
And as,
So
and as far,
that's the real issue. Is this going to make more affordable housing, more affordable quality housing for more people? That's the issue.
also, just one more thing. There's also a bullet point on this paper that says eliminate no fault evictions. Throughout the process of going through the eviction process, what is the determining factor whether or not a tenant can or cannot be evicted based upon the judge or based upon whatever the case may be?
That's a tough question. And my experience after having 30 years plus in this business is it depends on what side of the bed that judge woke up on that morning. I mean, it's that simple. You know, I've gotten warrants signed when I didn't think I would. And I've walked out of courthouses shaking my head, could not believe that we weren't able to successfully receive a warrant. It's all relative to the courthouse. The Syracuse court is handled differently than the town of Clay court. Judges handle this differently depending upon where they are and what they do. And you just cannot assume that one court will handle it the same way every other court handles it in the state. It's a mixed bag.
And in the case before making a decision to evict a resident, if there was something that they were going through, i.e. maybe losing a job or going through something life cause, how well have you worked with those individuals to help them out?
Well, I'll tell you, since COVID, everything changed. When we see a genuine situation, when I can only speak for myself. When I see a genuine situation, we try to work with them. And there's just so many reasons why, from a business standpoint, it makes sense to do that. On average right now, per case, if I have to hire an attorney, it's between $600 and $800. We used to be able to get those fees back based upon our leases. We cannot get those anymore. The court does not award legal fees to us. Okay, so the more times we go to court, the more money we're going to lose, regardless. And we've even had certain situations now, since tenants have really been educated on the eviction process since COVID, where I have some tenants who don't pay rent until they get served court documents. And that's kind of a problem. And I think maybe the only solution we could find is when we have stable tenants who do the right thing, maybe their rent increases could be capped or would only be so much. When you live there for a certain amount of time and you pay the rent on time and there's no management issues, good tenants deserve to be rewarded, okay? There's no question, and we want to do that. But there aren't enough of them, or I don't want to say there aren't enough of them, but the situations where there are tenants who are marginal cost us quite a bit of money. They do. It's just the reality of it. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yep. All right, and we appreciate the input and contributions of everybody today. As we look forward, what this body will do, we will be scheduling additional hearings, additional committee meetings on the topic. From, again, we're going to continue to get a variety of perspectives from the community. And
we're working on organizing the next meeting with the tenant organizations, so we can hear from that perspective as well.
And we hope that we get this much attention and participation in meetings to come. And so thank you, everyone, for coming today.
Wait, can we get here first?
If you have any questions, you can call my cell phone.
the eviction process.
In the tenants organization?
Today was not